Welcome. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to this 50th episode of TJHTalks on behalf of the Taube Center. We are grateful to all of you and to all our speakers for bringing us to the 6th season, and we look forward to the next 50 conversations. We're delighted that you've joined us or have chosen to watch the program on our YouTube channel. Please remember to subscribe if you already haven't and keep up with all the programs that we'd like to share with you. Our session will run approximately 45 to 50 minutes with time for a brief Q&A. Please share your questions in the chat section. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce you to our special guest speakers, Dr. Aleksandra Janus, Dr. Natalia Romik, and Professor Caroline Sturdy-Colls. Thank you, friends, colleagues, for being with us. Your contributions to the field of Holocaust research from different but convergent disciplines focuses on uncovering, revealing, and memorializing sites of Holocaust atrocities and survival. How do you balance academic rigor with emotional and cultural sensitivities, conflicting narratives, or resistance by those who not wanting to look back 81 years after the end of World War II? May we begin with Aleksandra, will you take us out?
Thank you, Halise. It's my great pleasure and honor to be here in this wonderful company. I would like to start by saying that in our work, we're, I think, mostly making the invisible visible, which makes a little bit of a difference. I mean, we are uncovering difficult stories, but we work with materiality of the Holocaust, and I will explain in a moment with some images what that means. So we are making the invisible visible by using evidence and through a participatory research process. And I think that makes it, to some extent, easier because we work with data. So we have tangible data that we're sort of like working with together with the communities in which we work. And if we can look at the images I prepared, I would love to show. Yes, so this is an example. As a Jewish organization, we work with uncommemorated burial sites of Holocaust victims, and they usually look like that. So that's what I mean by invisible. And we can go to the next image. This also is, again, a hideout and a burial site of 7 Jews murdered during the Holocaust. And the next image. Yes, sometimes in very rare cases, these are like in built areas. And the next slide, and this is a very rare case because in this case, we have the face of the Jewish girl who is buried in this place that you see in the image, and we can go forward. So by working with materiality of these sites and what is remembered locally, we extensively engage local community. And in this case, this is a quote from a local person that informed us about the fact that under a pear tree growing here that you can see in the center of this photo, the pear tree is actually marking the burial site. So as you can see, we try to work with these evidence, and in the participatory research process, we engage usually the local non-Jewish Polish communities in the work that we do. And if we go to the next image, we have so far located around 300 of such sites, and these are usually small sites. And the next image, and we do that through the use of non-invasive methodologies that obviously, Professor Caroline Sturdy-Colls is an expert on, and she'll definitely share more about that. So we use that to sort of like match what the local community remembers with tangible data and evidence. And we can go to the next image. So what you can see then, and what you can show also the people who are involved in that research is, the evidence for that materiality being there. And the next slide is the ground penetrating radar image of this particular place, which is a burial site and a hiding place in the forest, not far away from Warsaw. And the next image, yes, this is a LiDAR, so light detection and ranging lasers scan of the topography with, again, marked site. And the next image, And or like historical aerial photos, and I will show you like two more. So if we can go to the next slide. So we sort of like see things that are in the archives or in the actual vegetation or land, and we can show that to people. And in this image, this is an image of a Jewish cemetery in the town of Szczebrzeszyn. And when we go to the next image, you see these are the mass graves in the local Jewish cemetery. So you can see how clearly they are visible once you look through a certain lens or through a certain material. And the next, and they are also visible in LiDAR image. And the next image, if we can go to the next image, you see them marked in red. So these are the 4 mass graves that we located in Szczebrzeszyn. And the next image, please. So the way we work, we combine these various methods and approaches, and we combine that with the local vernacular memory. So the memory that is preserved about these sites and stories among local non-Jewish Polish communities, because we mostly work on the territory of Poland. And the truth is that we sort of like tell these communities things they already know, but we just make them visible through a different lens, or we bring additional layers of data that prove the things they passed on from generation to generation. That's why I like the term, and I will end here, the term non-sites of memory that was coined by a dear friend of mine, Professor Roma Syndyka, because these sites that we work with, these uncommemorated burial sites of Holocaust victims in Poland, are not forgotten, but they are not commemorated. So they are not actively remembered usually. They're usually not commemorated, but they're not forgotten, because when you go to these villages, people usually know where they are, right? So it's not, so we are not bringing them the knowledge that is new to them. We are just finding ways in which we can explain and prove and like bring evidence that actually confirms certain things that were remembered, and then help these communities go, or like help facilitate the process in which these communities can also come to terms with this past. And obviously not only them, because we work with different stakeholders, but when you asked about also like certain resistance that you might be confronted with, I think it's very important that this is a participatory process that starts with us, with them informing us, then us looking for evidence, and then involving them in the research process, but also involving them in the commemoration process.
Ola, thank you for this wonderful introduction and putting that perspective, that shining that light on the archaeology of the Holocaust. Natalia, will you address that first question?
Yes, thank you, Helis, and thank you for the invitation. And this is a big pleasure. So maybe I would like to start with my most recent book. It's this one called Archaeological of Memory, that was published by the University College of London, UCL Press, as a part of the series. Actually, the series was named Design Research in Architecture. And we launched it actually a month ago in UCL. And the book is a conclusion of almost 15 years of my work. It's quite a lot, and included a doctorate by practice, which was an enormous privilege to conduct in the Bartlett School of Architecture, together with François Genet from Jewish Studies Department, Jonathan Hill, and Professor Mary Fraser. And why I mention it? Because the doctorate program at the Bartlett conveyed in order to support the research based by design, which links to the architectural experiments and also artistic intervention, but as well with academic rigor. And the book series was established to provide a place where its research can be published, and research on Holocaust as well. So you're really the most welcome to download this book for free as a UCL website. So the book is driven by my architectural and artistic practice that copes still with the problems of urban emptiness and the spectral architecture of abandoned post-Jewish places and properties in a former shtetl in Poland. And since years, my design, exhibition project, and performances intend to negotiate between need to commemorate former users and also necessity to respect the rights of the current inhabitants. And here I would like to show you very briefly the project of Nomadic Shtetl Archive, which actually this project leads me to other project, but also enabled me to build coalition, which I think is the most important in our practice. So since years, for me was the most important to liberate and make public archives of the Jewish Historical Institute, Polish Academy of Science, and collection of NGOs to actually bring those materials to the shtetls, to the shtetls. And as you can see, this is like a piece of nomadic architecture, mobile architecture, which traveled in a southeastern Poland. And some people call it like mobile Jewish shop or mobile synagogues. But the archive is a build of mobile trailer, and the walls, as you can see in these pictures, and the roof are constructed from wood and covered with the plastic mirrors. And to attract people interest in archival materials, I designed also adjustable doors, which also serve as exhibition walls. And the main aim, actually, of using the mirrors was to disappear and also to merge in the landscape and emphasize the importance of what was exhibited inside, which changed in each shtetl. And in the next slide, you can also see the archive contains a small library, which inside we were showing poetry related to the shtetl, its core book, and also a couple of theoretical texts and essay. And in the front, we carried out discussion and workshop. And in the next slide, you will see where inhabitants were not only passively absorbing the documents, but also they were sharing with me, for example, very strange materials. You will see maybe in the next slide afterwards. No, please, if you can come back to the previous one. And the conversation in each city were very much different because the couple of topics stay the same, but the problems, for example, privatization and the lack of the knowledge about past stay the same. We also talk about the programs in the 20s and the 30s and very cruel capitalist revitalization, which was like in the 90s. And during the trip, mostly in Lubelszczyzna, we were able to visit 10 cities. But in August this year, together with a Center of Urban History from Lviv, we decided to also travel to Ukraine, to Podolia region, and also to talk about very, very similar topics, not only about architecture, but also about the pogroms. So I think this really matters to me in this project. It's like nomadic continuity, and also to establish coalitions and to be strong together, talking about not only Holocaust, but also architecture.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for adding yet another dimension to our hologram, for lack of a better phrase. Caroline, please address that question, and we'll move the conversation further.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here and wonderful to be in conversation with all of you. I admire Ola's and Natalia's work very much. And it's great to put these perspectives together. So I really started my research on the basis of trying to uncover new perspectives on Holocaust sites, particularly to try and find the evidence of mass graves and to locate and characterize the camps and ghettos and other killing sites beyond the more traditional sites that people know about, using an approach that had at its very core the ethics of doing so, because obviously dealing with sites of genocide, sites of mass violence of any kind elicits numerous responses. And as a researcher, I think it's incredibly important to be mindful of that. So if we can go to my first slide, please. I began this research actually as a master's student and a PhD student. And then in 2015, I published a book based on that work called Holocaust Archaeologies, Approaches and Future Directions. And in that book, I tried to set out not one size fits all methodology, but a suite of approaches that could be adapted to working at different Holocaust sites in order to really have the ability to document as much evidence as possible. But as I said, whilst being respectful to the variety of religious, cultural and other ethical issues. So the most prevalent of these, of course, in much of my work is the fact that sites are often involving the remains of victims who are Jewish. And therefore, just like Ola's work and Fondazione Zapomniane, who've very much been mentors to me in this work as well, I had to understand how Halakha approaches the issue of not disturbing human remains. And of course, archaeology traditionally has used excavation as an approach. And when you're not allowed to excavate in areas containing human remains, clearly you have to shift your thinking and shift your approach. And that's really what I did in developing my methodology. And of course, what I often am confronted with as well is the fact that you have victims from other groups, from other religious backgrounds, or the concerns around the way the dead are treated that have to be considered in combination. And so if I can show my second slide, please. And so in the field, we use a range of different approaches that I'll come on to in a second. But what we also do is make sure that we, like Ola said, engage with the communities who are and have been affected by our work, that we seek rabbinical counsel. And the chief rabbi of Poland, again, has been a huge advocate of our work and a valuable mentor, but also other rabbis around the world who've helped me really understand where we can excavate, where we can't, and how we can really be sensitive to the wide range of issues that arise in these unprecedented circumstances of investigating sites like the camps, as I said, and other places connected to the Holocaust. And if we can go to my third slide, I don't have time to delve into these methods, but Ola's done a wonderful job of introducing some of them already, so you've saved me some time. But essentially, the methodology that I came up with begins as a historian would, in terms of the archive. And so I spend a lot of time researching documents and maps, plans, photographs, post-war forensic reports, for example, as well, which are often invaluable to see what evidence was found in 1944 through, say, the rest of the 1940s by the first people who went to these sites. And then once we get into the field, again, we are looking for the kind of subtle traces like vegetation change, depressions, remains of buildings that may exist, and to varying degrees, as we'll see in some of the examples I'll show later. Sites survive well above the ground, or they don't survive so well. And then we use a range of geophysical methods which enable us to look beneath the ground, like ground penetrating radar that Ola mentioned, but also others that don't act like an X-ray, but certainly give us a sense of what we call anomalies exist beneath the ground. And when we combine all of that with the archival research and can put that together, we can often say whether we feel strongly that a grave or other remains exist beneath the ground. And sometimes, as I said, we are then allowed to excavate as a result of excluding the areas containing mass graves. So, for example, we've been able to excavate barrack foundations, the remains of the gas chambers at Treblinka, which I'll say more about later, and other sites as well. So really, by taking that approach that has ethics at its core, my team and I have been able to access sites that weren't accessible before, and we've been able to do so and document them in a way, as I said, that won't cause any further pain and suffering. Because in my view, it's incredibly important when investigating sites where people have already suffered so much, not to then cause more upset and to be disrespectful to the beliefs of those individuals and their descendants. And so that's really what we advocate for in all of our work. At least we can't hear you.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you for reminding me to push the button. Thank you, each of you, Ola and Natalia and Caroline, for sort of introducing us to a whole new understanding of how we might really think about how we memorialize from all the sources, whether it's as a survivor's child but that, what's on the surface, we stop, educators stop. I'm sorry to say, and we sort of stop on what we see. right? The memorials we see, the camps we see, the markings we see. And what you three and your colleagues are really inspiring us to do is to use it as a kind of a, as you well described, an archaeological tell by which, going deeper and deeper, we might really have a better understanding, if one ever can, of the atrocities, how people survived or they didn't. But as you say, being very mindful of Jewish law, but also the ethics of not hurting any further those who were victims. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. We are now going to ask each of you a specific question. So Aleksandra, hola. You've already alluded to this, but one of the interesting aspects of your work is that you're not reaching out based on any archives you've already researched or any information that you might already have, but I understand that you respond to the information that is brought to you by local individuals. And so this is a very interesting approach. What challenges and opportunities do you see when working with these individuals and local communities, as you point out, who do have a memory? They may not acknowledge it, but they do have a collective memory to mark and memorialize these sites. Who becomes the caretaker and who becomes the steward? Hola, please.
Thank you so much, Elise, for this question. And, as an anthropologist, I'm most interested in how people behave around certain, sites and material objects. What's going on, in between these people and in these communities. And as you said, so we respond to notifications, and I can tell you we receive more than we can handle as a small team. People, non-Jewish, Polish communities, people from these communities reach out to us, sharing the information that they know about their own uncommemorated burial sites. And we respond to that rather than going region by region, because some of these people are elderly people, and we have to make sure, we want to make sure that we get there on time to actually listen to what they have to say. But very often we also work with local memory activists, right? And with them, they are sort of gate opener to these communities. And through us, I think, and this, there is a valid question. So if they know about that, why do they need us, right? But we come first and foremost. It's in many cases it's important that we come as a Jewish organization, and with the perspective of the Jewish religious led, the halacha that Caroline mentioned, and that we are sort of an outsider coming, not to tell them what to do, but to help them also. We help them, we facilitate the process. We do the research. Obviously, we have the knowledge, the tools, but then we don't leave, but we also stay in the process of commemorating. And if we can show my slides again, I will just briefly answer the question about custodian. We can go to the next image immediately. So we developed this methodology that after we locate a site, to commemorate it with a proper stone memorial, it takes time and it takes money. So what we do is we develop this temporary markers, and we can immediately leave them there, because we realize that when we come to these people, they really expect us to change something in these sites immediately, right? Because that's why they called. So we developed this methodology of work, and we can go to the next slide. What we didn't realize is how quickly many of these wooden, places were marked with wooden markers become memorials. This is usually us facilitating the process, but not always. And this is a unique site. You can see the wooden marker behind. This is a very unique case, because this place we never thought would be commemorated, because it's a private plot. It's somebody's backyard. And this person was the person who explicitly asked us for then do it quickly, do it properly. We can go to the next, and obviously not every site is, it's different in many places, but we also see that these wooden markers, they open up local memory, and people start performing commemorative practices around them. Bring flowers, for example, or we can go to the next slide, or bring other objects. I see the images are a bit blurry, but you can see in this case, somebody brought a red necklace and left it there. And we realized that there is a story that is stored in the memory of the local community about this site. This is a burial site of a single Jewish woman. In this site, this particular grave was marked for many years after the war by a necklace hanging from a branch of a tree, right? So this was a symbolic sort of like bringing that story back. And the next image, if we can go to the next image, or sometimes we don't know the personal details, the names, and people add, like here, there's an addition to this wooden marker with the names of the victims. Mundek and Cilla Strauber. So we see that like through this slow process of first, getting the data, collecting the evidence, working with the local vernacular memory that is usually, sometimes it is represented in the archives, sometimes don't, we create a space where certain commemorative processes can be negotiated, right? So because obviously we bring our perspective, and we represent the Jewish community where we originated from the Office of Chief Rabbi of Poland as an organization, but we also often contact descendants, right? So we then create space where dialogue is possible, and very often this creates for the local communities who usually are everyday custodians of these sites. This creates for them an opportunity to not only get used to the fact that this site is changing, but also discuss and negotiate the future of the site. And I think this is really important. And and not every case is easy, and not everywhere, we can erect a memorial quickly. But what I see a tremendous value in the fact that in the process, the descendants, us as an organizations, the local non-Jewish Polish communities, we all come together and we have an opportunity to really talk about how we want the site to look like, right? What's the future of the site and who's going to be responsible for it? And I think this process itself is an extremely powerful one. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Ola, thank you very much for taking us, as you could say, sort of really deeper. But when you first introduced me to the Foundation's methodology, you mentioned something which also really stayed with me, is that for the locals and also maybe victims, this is the first sort of acknowledgement, letting out the secret, being visible. I'm really struck by how that really inspires whatever. It's an open space that used to be incredibly sealed, either by not wanting to share or sharing but not knowing how to do it. So your work really is quite inspiring. Thank you. Did you want to add to that?
Yes, maybe. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I think there's also something for me as an anthropologist important that these are like, as I said, non-sites of memory. So there was nothing visual, right? There was nothing out there, but also there was no ritual. So very often when we first organize a commemorative ceremony, is like a funeral after 8 decades, right? So it's also it's a process that helps. And as an anthropologist, I know rituals and ceremonies are powerful things, right? That's how we as humans, cope with different things in the world. And I think, this is also something when we approach this in this step-by-step methodology, we can really then make sure that we build a community around the site. And I think this community building process is important, and as you said, and then the secret can become something else. Can be, it will always be a burden because many of these stories are difficult stories, right? Also, for the local communities that might have been implicated in the violence, but also, the secret becomes like something else, right? It can still be, a difficult story, but it doesn't have to be a burden, as it used to be. So there is a potential for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Natalia, as you've already mentioned, your research in artistic installations, of course, your 2 books explore architecture as a medium for transmitting memory. And in your books, especially the one about hiding places, if I may go back to the previous publication, You focus on spaces of hiding during the Holocaust, many of which are surprising. How does memorializing sites of survival expand our knowledge or maybe a deeper understanding or better sense of commemoration of Holocaust memory?
Thank you, Helis. I think I will start with the nomadic Städte archive and also to show the continuity and how the role of design as a shamus, it's very crucial to me. There was there was a very hot day in Bychawa, small shtetl near Lublin. We reached Bychawa before the Second World War, 66% of Jewish population. And during the conversation about localization of the mikveh, somebody brought me documents of Jewish pupil found in the attics in the Bychawa house. And there was this moment when I start to wonder in what architectural condition are the hiding places nowadays? Has anyone ever researched them? And that was precisely in Bychawa that I initiated thinking about this project, Architecture of Survival, and shown in the National Gallery of Art and the Jewish Museum in Frankfurt between 2022-2024. And the project was supported by Genda Henkel Stiftung, Schwa Foundation, and as well Taube Foundation. And very briefly, I will underline that the subject matter of Jews going into hiding and the assistance they have received has appeared in a various research contexts of Holocaust, but still we know very, very little about hiding places themselves. And why so? Once because of the erosion of the places, and also researchers have focused mostly on the fate of those in a hiding. This was actually the main idea what I started to think about architecture. And this is estimated that during the Second World War, only 50,000 survived Holocaust by being hidden among so-called Aryan sites. And from the beginning, I thought how we can think and how we can navigate research about hiding places. So if you can see the next slide, this is the picture from Jewish Museum Frankfurt. You can see one-to-one cast of the hideouts were shown, silver plated with the highest quality of silver. And the story was about 9 hiding places. I would love to show you today one history from the Okopowa Cemetery. And in a second slide, you will see the second room of this exhibition, which was dedicated to the research-based stories and architectural and also archaeological analysis of this place. And the site that we study is actually also with Aleksandra Janus and Witold Drosiński in detail. It's actually probably one only remaining Holocaust hideouts in Warsaw. So you will see in the next slide. This is the place where Abraham Karmi was hiding. And this is a picture taken from drone, so you can see only part of this hideout that was namely the ceiling. And archaeological, geodetic, and historical research was carried out actually in this place. So in the next pictures, you can see also a part of the investigation made by geodets, and also we made also archaeological research. And we actually managed to find Mr. Karmi, and currently also we are working to commemorate this place, which I think is quite crucial. In the next slide, you will see our proposal for commemoration. The story was very complex. We know that 4 people were shot on the spot. There was a one rule that you were never running to this place, to the hideouts. And we know also that the place was built by Isaac Posner and Moshe Aroniak. So the idea is to build a monument, but as an archaeological site. So everything what Dr. Szymon Lenarczyk he found, we would like to place inside and to cover with the glass, with the very simple lighting, and also bring the memory in Hebrew and English and Polish about the people who were shot on the spot. So for me, this project is really crucial because it's not stopped in the exhibition in Frankfurt. The exhibition will be currently probably in Bonn, but this is something more that also we as architect, artists, and archaeologists, we should commemorate those places. And actually the space is not in the best condition. This is like in the heart of the Orthodox quarter, in the quarter number 41. So I hope in the next year we will be able to commemorate this place.
Thank you, Natalia, for introducing us to another of hideouts or spaces that enable people to survive. I mean, you've introduced us to trees, tree trunks, closets, spaces now. Carmi's hiding spot in the Okopova Jewish Cemetery. Another quick question: how do these sites enable? How do these sites play a role? And I'm sure we touched upon it, but in allowing us to expand our understanding of survival of the Holocaust and those who helped us as Jews or those to survive. Just a quick added question.
There was like a kind of moment that I was not able to hear you. It's about how I decide. And Elise?
Let me try again. And just thinking about how you've introduced us to different sites of survival. We know about attics, or we've heard about attics and basements and closets, but you've introduced us to tree trunks and closets within a closet. And now you've introduced us to a Jewish cemetery in which Jews of Warsaw found a place to survive as best they could, using the matzevot, the tombstones, using the environment to ensure their survival. So how does that help us understand that the modes of survival and those who helped us survive?
It's a very good question. And I will maybe tell the story when Abraham called me, that was back then, probably 4 years ago, that was in one of the kibbutzim nearby Tel Aviv. When I asked him, maybe you might tell us more about the daily routine of food and the people with whom you stay in a hiding. He said, Natalia, I can tell you more about architecture, because the daily routine was too painful. And I think architecture and this, I would say, contour memorial site, how we can think not only about commemoration, but also how we can use different apparatus, different tools to investigate Holocaust sites are really crucial, because the language is also changing. And also language is changing. We have a rising anti-Semitism. And this is our question, how we can implicate the new methods to our own research, which is not really easy. That's why I started with my book, which was really big trust and UCL at the Bartlett School of Architecture. But probably in Poland, it was really, really hard back then to juxtapose different I would say, methods from history and oral history and architecture and art to actually bring this specific set of the research. And also coming back to your question, I think each place was very much different. The places in Ukraine, for example, 158 kilometers cave in Ozerna was very, very hard to research. And without, again, speleologists who provided us inside the cave to understand the life and the shelter of the Stremer family or sewer system in Lviv, that would be really hard to work without specialists. And that's why Nomadic Shtetl Archive will travel this year to Podole region together with a Center of Urban History. And that's why I think also we should support this institution and build larger coalitions.
Thank you, Natalia. And Caroline, your extensive research, as we've already learned, has led to new information and spatial understandings of the Holocaust, sometimes challenging assumptions and all the while expanding knowledge about all but buried Holocaust sites. How does your archaeological work reveal, when it does reveal new evidence and substantiates testimonies, how does that fit with existing scholarship and assumptions?
Thank you, Elise. That's a great question. And I think when we read Holocaust testimony, when we encounter historical scholarship on the Holocaust, we don't have to look too far to find the different perceptions of space and places and materiality in those narratives. And I think oftentimes I come up against two opposing views. I think one is that people are very familiar with places like Auschwitz and Majdanek, where obviously they were liberated at a time when the physical remnants of the crimes that happened still existed. So in those cases, people often say, well, we have the physical things. We know these sites, we found them early, so we know everything there is to know because we can see the evidence. And I mean, of course, that is really complex, because in those spaces we see the evidence that survives and the visible evidence from a moment in time. But obviously camps weren't static, and they had multiple evolutions often, and buildings were put up and taken down, and objects came into the space and were taken away again. So even in those places, we're seeing very much, through a tiny lens, what the materiality of those spaces look like. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, we have spaces like, for example, Treblinka, where I've worked a lot. And if we can maybe show my first slide here, where the perception is that these sites were entirely destroyed, and that the Nazis were able to successfully eradicate all of the evidence of their crimes. And in many cases through my research, I've actually looked at the reasons why this is. So, for example, many post-war photographs like this one will sort of take, again, a snapshot of the landscape where you see very little. There was not so much value placed upon objects or partially demolished buildings in 1944 or 1945 as we place on those things now as forensic archaeologists, for example. And I think really many people, of course, because victims' bodies were treated in a whole range of awful ways to hide them in particular, people have this view that, the buildings were taken down, the ashes of the victims were, bodies first were cremated, and then the ashes of the victims were hidden. And so I think for decades, people really believed in many cases that that evidence had gone. And so again, where my positionality was at the beginning of my research is that crimes of this magnitude cannot leave no traces in the landscape. They have to have left some kind of trace. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. The other thing I think that I often encounter is the fact that where materiality and space is considered and is mentioned or is represented in witness testimonies, again, what we're seeing is a very small snapshot of what an individual experienced. And these sources are, of course, invaluable, as archaeologists and historians, to help us understand what sites were like, how people perceive those spaces, and how they experience them. But again, what they often do is they, like the image on the screen here is showing us what this one person was able to see. And in this case, actually, this is a model which was created by Jankel Viernik, a very well-known survivor from Treblinka, who was actually able to move very freely around the camp. He was a carpenter, so he actually built a lot of the camp. But what's interesting here is that when he created his model, he created it as a rectangle. And Treblinka is not a rectangle. It was a completely different shape. So if we only use testimonies that talk about sites being partially destroyed, or we only use models and maps which show us a particular representation of a site, we don't necessarily understand them the way that they were in reality. So that's where I really see archaeology being very important. And if we can go on to my next slide, please. So, for example, at Treblinka, you can see here represented in the LiDAR data that this was a sort of trapezoid shape. And if you then understand where the boundaries of the camp are, suddenly you're able to understand, well, this is how people moved from the railway platform, for example, to the gas chambers. And this is how people moved, if they were members of the Sonderkommando, between their living spaces. And this is what they were able to see from where they were based. And your whole perspective changes on that when you map accurately in the landscape where these buildings are. So, for example, here again, we're seeing in the LiDAR data a depression, which we later showed to be the exact location of the old gas chambers in Treblinka. Very different to where testimony in many cases suggested they might have been. In some cases, it perfectly matched where some survivors said they might have been as well. So archaeology obviously has this role in kind of substantiating witness testimony, and then also filling in the gaps where witness testimony is not able to provide those answers. And for sites like, for example, gas chambers or the killing sites where most of the people who saw them were murdered, we have to turn to methods like archaeology, or at least viewing sources through a material lens, because many of those people who saw these sites aren't able to speak for themselves. So I think there's much more to say, but I'll leave it there. But I think that in a way shows this very complex, intertwined relationship between testimony and the physical evidence that the sites leave behind. And I think it's very, very important as scholars that we take into consideration all of this material rather than leaning one way or the other.
Caroline, thank you for adding yet another layer or dimension, which Ola and Natalia have contributed to. And I go back to my thought about how it is a hologram, and also how personal memory must affect how people drew a map. Where were they standing? Where were they sitting? And also understanding that, this is one source of many, and the three of you have talked about different sources and how that material is presented, testimony, the accuracy of memory, of course, we all have to contend with. So before we go on to one question or two from our audience, I'd just like to ask each of you to make a closing comment, if you like, or pose a challenge as we continue the TJHT Talks episodes. Ola?
Yeah, I was, when listening to this conversation and being part of it, I think there's something extremely powerful about interdisciplinary methodologies, but also like collaborations. And I think the word collaborations has been mentioned a couple of times already. And my closing comment around all that is linked to that. And as we sit here, we also all in different ways work together or inspire each other. So I think, especially working with such difficult and painful topics, I think this is really an important aspect of that work, to really build coalitions of like-minded people who share similar mission. And we can learn from each other, as we learned from Caroline, as I learned from Natalia a lot, and from you, Elise, as well. And I think because that's also how we change this last landscape, the post-Holocaust landscape, and that's how we also change the sites, but also the people who live there now. And not only by doing this work, but also how we do this work in terms of how we work together. So this would be my last closing comment.
Thank you, Ola. Natalia?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do not see a future in the bright colors. And anti-Semitism is present not only in Manchester, Melbourne, Warsaw, New York, but also in the former shtetls and in the small towns, in the suburbs. So our language and also people caring for Jewish heritage must also adapt, I would say, to the changing world. And I really believe in the interdisciplinary research of the Holocaust and Jewish heritage. And I think it's good to talk about dreams, but I really dream of creating a center for artistic research on Jewish heritage. So I hope maybe in the next, 20 years, 10 years, or in a year, that might happen. And I would love to work with Caroline and with Aleksandra, and of course with you, Elise. And actually, I prepared 2 slides, but I don't know that we have time to talk about it now. So actually, that was very briefly for 2 minutes. That was my first architectural, I would say, task, which actually brings back how we can talk about Jewish heritage and the history that was during my work in initial design. And my first task was to reconstruct the Bima, which was completely destroyed by Germans during the war. It's like 18th century synagogue, and to the left you can see the picture of the Bima. And I was thinking not to reconstruct in a one-to-one scale this Bima, but also how we can think about more hantological discourse and to reconstruct the Bima entirely from glass. So what you can see, this is like a glass, and it's very hard to navigate. It's from the past, it's from the future, or from the present. And also, I think you are very welcome, by the way, to see Chmielnik. And in the next slide, you will see example where together with Justyna Koszarska-Szulc and Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet, we created an exhibition of the Meyer-Kirschenblatt extraordinary paintings in Polin of every day life in the pre-war Opatów. And we decided to pair his painting with a contemporary critical look of the erosion of the memory of today's architecture in Opatów. And what you can see here, this is like the slide we use in this exhibition as a material witness, wood from the ruined Polish Jewish school. And actually we use this wood to design the whole exhibition, whole set. And we talk in this exhibition a lot about post-war transfer of the Jewish property, very difficult subject. And my goal since really like more than 10 years, and I hope in the future, is how we can also talk about a very difficult subject, like a transfer of the Jewish property, pogroms, but also how people now in the shtetls, they live in old Jewish houses, they use still Jewish workshops, and how we can talk critically, but also with the balance to commemorate those places. So I will stop maybe with Meyer-Kirschenblatt and counter-monumental exhibition, post-Jewish, po-Żydowskie, and I will close with this. Thank you.
Natalia, thank you. Caroline.
Thank you very much, and maybe I'll also use my final two slides because they actually fit with the question quite well as well. So, actually, we can go on to the next one, please. Right now I'm working on a project in Travniki, and Halise, I know you had the opportunity to hear me speak about this recently at the Holocaust Museum, where I'm undertaking a fellowship right now in Washington, DC. And this project really, I think, for me, embodies much about how I see the future of Holocaust studies, and particularly the future of investigations that involve the spatial and material and archaeological aspects of investigation. In that it brings together, again, an interdisciplinary team of practitioners from many countries around the world and from many different disciplines: archaeology, history, anthropology, forensic investigation, and the digital humanities, for example. I think that's just a few. So for me, working collaboratively is incredibly important because each of the members of my wonderful team bring different perspectives on the history of this very complex site where multiple camps were coexisting together and in succession, and where we've used a wide range of digital tools to examine a landscape where people now occupy the buildings that the camp comprised, where new structures have been built over graves and other aspects of the former camp's history. And so in order to visualize and also to disentangle the contemporary landscape from the former camp landscape, I think these digital tools are really, really valuable. And what they also do is offer a way, obviously, to reach a wider audience, to present our findings online, and also to provide access to the site to people who may, for whatever reason, not be able to travel there, and also to avoid the local community having, necessarily influxes of people interested in this difficult past with which they have to grapple, of course, every day. So I see these techniques as really, really valuable. And if we can just move on to the next slide as well. And also as part of this field work, we've worked very, very closely with lots of different groups. So we've had students come on field courses. We've had experts from the US Holocaust Memorial Museum and Holocaust Center North, based at the University of Huddersfield, join us in the field so that they can see firsthand how we do our work. And Halise, I know you were very keen to join us, and I would absolutely love to have you and your colleagues come and do that, so that hopefully we can illustrate the different ways in which the stories of these sites can be told through site-based and remote approaches. And also, continuing to work with descendants, I feel is extremely important. And many descendants have made incredible contributions to our research. And allow us to continually reflect on the impact of the work that we do, and how to do it better, and how to continue to take into consideration those ethical challenges. I think bringing all this together and taking these interdisciplinary approaches, I really hope will engage people in future generations, because I think often, as we say this a lot, it's, that we are entering an age without survivors. We are entering an age where already, I should say, that people have less and less knowledge about the Holocaust. And I do think a lot of people get very interested and engaged when we start to talk about archaeological techniques, or taking them to the site, or allowing them to encounter the site in new ways, as Ola and Natalia are, of course, doing their research as well. And I think maybe that can spark an interest in people at a time when we really need people to be sitting up and listening to these histories in new ways, given the rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to end this conversation, so I propose to you that this dream team of thoughtful, ethical practitioners and academics come together again in the future to continue this conversation. I know you are having it in your own fields. We have it. I am excited by the words of coalition and collaboration, which is a positive term now. We can take it back. And interdisciplinary approaches, which, as you just said, Caroline, and all of you have said, is how do we engage people in this? These narratives and in memorialization, but and also internalizing in some way that we are all responsible. We are all stewards. In fact, one of the questions was, what happens to your work when there are no longer survivors who can share their stories? And I'm sure that you are each thinking about this as people who have the firsthand knowledge are no longer with us. But we do engage their memory, and of course the descendants. So Natalia, Ola, and Caroline, the Taube Center is extremely grateful and honored that you joined us. Our dear audience, thank you for joining us or watching us on our YouTube. Please remember that it's your donation and contribution that allows us to continue to provide TJHTalks. I've sort of committed to 50, so our challenge is there. And of course, thank you to the team you don't see, Jakub and Kaya, who are behind the scenes. We look forward to many collaborations in the future. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. See you in March.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.